Captain Han Jin pressed his palm against the cold metal of the viewport, watching the stars blur past as Kepler station continued its slow orbit around the gas giant below. The massive research outpost stretched out like a metal city in space, its spinning rings creating artificial gravity for the thousands of crew members who called it home. For 3 years, it had been humanity's greatest achievement in deep space exploration, a symbol of what humans could accomplish when they reached for the stars. The morning shift had started like any other. Coffee brewing in the mess halls, scientists reviewing their research data, engineers maintaining the massive fusion reactors that powered their home among the stars. Han had been reading reports about their latest discoveries when the emergency beacon started screaming across all frequencies. "Captain, to the bridge." The voice of Lieutenant Park Da-hai cut through the peaceful morning like a knife. "Emergency rescue operation. We have a distress pod incoming from the merchant vessel Starfire Dawn." Han's boots echoed against the metal deck plates as he rushed to the command center. The bridge buzzed with activity as crew members worked frantically at their stations. On the main screen, a tiny escape pod tumbled through space, its hull scarred and blackened by some terrible encounter. "What's the situation?" Han demanded, settling into his command chair. "The pod launched from the Starfire Dawn approximately 6 hours ago," reported Navigation Officer Song Min Ho, his fingers dancing across his control panel. The merchant ship was carrying a mixed crew of 30 aliens and humans on a routine cargo run to the outer colonies. "We're not receiving any other distress signals from the main vessel." Lieutenant Park's face was pale as she turned from her communications console. "Sir, I've been trying to raise the Starfire Dawn on all frequencies. Nothing but static. It's like the entire ship just vanished." The rescue operation took 47 minutes. The station's recovery shuttles brought the damaged pod into Bay 7, where the medical team waited with emergency equipment. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Yu So-young emerged from the pod with grim news. "One survivor," she reported over the comm. "Arctian male, severely injured but stable. He's been sedated, but he keeps repeating something about a warbeast in his sleep." Han felt ice form in his stomach. Every human child grew up hearing the stories, the legends passed down from the older alien species who had seen the galaxy before humanity joined the stars. The Fenrathi warbeasts were nightmare fuel, creatures of myth and terror that supposedly destroyed entire civilizations before vanishing into the dark corners of space. In Medical Bay 7, the Arctian survivor, named Veltar, struggled against the medical restraints, his blue skin covered in cold sweat. His large black eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal, and when he spoke, his voice cracked with terror. "You have to listen to me," Veltar gasped, grabbing Dr. Kim Tae-ho's white coat with surprising strength. "It was in the cargo." "Hold dormant," we thought. The shipping manifest said it was a preserved specimen from an archaeological dig, but when the stasis field failed, the Arctian's voice trailed off as he relived the horror. Captain Zhekner tried to seal the cargo. But those claws. They cut through reinforced steel like it was paper. The creature moved so fast. 30 people, all dead in minutes. I only escaped because I was already near the pod when it started hunting. Dr. Kim leaned forward, his scientific curiosity warring with growing dread. "This creature, can you describe it? 3 meters tall, maybe more. Built like a predator from humanity's worst nightmares. Black fur with silver markings, claws that could tear apart a starship, and eyes." Veltar shuddered. Eyes like burning amber, filled with nothing but rage and hunger. It didn't just kill for food. It killed because that's what it was made to do. The medical bay's monitoring systems suddenly began screaming warnings. In the isolation chamber where they had placed the recovered cargo from the escape pod, something was moving. The stasis container, damaged during the pod's escape, was losing power. "Everyone out!" shouted Dr. Kim, but it was too late. The container exploded outward in a shower of metal and freezing vapor. From within the cloud stepped something that belonged in humanity's darkest dreams. The Fenrathi warbeast stood nearly 3 meters tall, its massive frame covered in midnight black fur that seemed to absorb the medical bay's bright lights. Silver-tipped claws, each as long as a man's forearm, gleamed as they extended from paws the size of dinner plates. But it was the eyes that froze everyone in place. Burning amber orbs that held intelligence, malice, and an ancient hunger that had been waiting centuries to be unleashed again. Nurse Yun Mi Ra was closest to the creature when it fully awakened. She had been adjusting the monitoring equipment when those terrible eyes locked onto her. Her scream echoed through the corridors of Kepler Station, a sound of pure terror that seemed to awaken something primal in every human who heard it, the creature's restraints, designed to hold the strongest. Known alien species snapped like children's toys. Its roar shook the entire medical bay, rattling equipment and cracking reinforced viewports. The sound carried through the station's ventilation systems, a challenge that promised death to everything that lived. Engineer Lee Dong-sik was calibrating plasma conduits in Section C when the reinforced doors to his workshop simply exploded inward. Through the smoke and spark stepped the nightmare, its amber eyes scanning the room with predatory intelligence. Lee grabbed his plasma torch, the same tool he used to cut through thick metal plating, and aimed it at the creature. The superheated plasma beam struck the Warbeast center mass, a shot that should have melted through armor plating. Instead, the creature's fur barely singed. It looked down at the scorch mark on its chest, then back at Lee with what could only be described as amusement. Lee had time for one last thought before the massive jaws closed around him. He wondered if his wife would remember to water the small garden they kept in their quarters. "All hands to emergency stations," Captain Han's voice boomed through every speaker on the station. "We have a code black situation. All civilians to secure locations. Military personnel, arm yourselves and prepare for hostile contact. This is not a drill." But as the captain gave his orders deep in the bowels of Kepler Station, the Warbeast lifted its massive head and tested the air. Thousands of scents filled its nostrils, painting a map of prey throughout the station. Its lips pulled back in, what might have been a smile, revealing fangs designed to crush the life from anything that dared to exist in its presence. The hunt had begun, and after centuries of sleep, the ancient killer was hungry. Commander Ryu Sang-min had fought pirates in the asteroid belts, survived boarding actions against hostile alien raiders, and earned 3 medals for bravery in deep space combat. But nothing in his 20 years of military service had prepared him for this. His tactical squad moved through the darkened corridors. Of Section D, their pulse rifles charged and ready, emergency lighting casting eerie shadows on the metal walls. "Stay tight, stay sharp," Ryu whispered into his comm as they approached the last known location of the creature. Behind him, 5 of Kepler Station's best Marines followed in perfect formation, their boots silent on the deck plates. These weren't fresh recruits but seasoned veterans who had faced down everything the galaxy could throw at them. The silence was broken by a sound that made their blood freeze. Somewhere ahead in the darkness, metal was being torn apart like paper. Not cut or melted, but simply ripped to pieces by something impossibly strong. The sound echoed through the ventilation systems, mixed with what could only be described as satisfied growling. "Movement 200 meters ahead," reported Corporal Kim Ye-jin, her rifle's targeting system painting a heat signature that seemed too large to be real. "Sir, the scanner says it's 3.5 meters tall. That can't be right." "It's right," Ryu said grimly, remembering the briefing they'd received from the medical bay. "Remember, aim for the eyes. If conventional weapons don't work, we fall back and try the heavy plasma cannons." They rounded the corner into what had once been the station's main dining hall. Tables and chairs were scattered like toys, and in the center of the destruction stood the Warbeast. Up close, it was even more terrifying than the reports had suggested. Its massive frame moved with predatory grace as it fed on something they couldn't identify and didn't want to. "Target acquired," Ryu shouted, and 6 pulse rifles opened fire simultaneously. The concentrated barrage would have vaporized a battle tank, but the energy bolts simply sparked off the creature's hide like raindrops hitting stone. The beast turned toward them with casual interest, amber eyes gleaming in the muzzle flashes of their weapons. What happened next defied everything Ryu knew about combat. The creature moved with impossible speed for something so massive, covering 50 meters in what seemed like a single bound. Corporal Kim managed one terrified scream before claws the size of sword blades swept her aside. Her rifle clattered across the floor, its barrel bent at an impossible angle. "Fall back. Fall back," Ryu ordered, but the Warbeast was already among them. Private Lee Jung-ho tried to dive for cover behind an overturned table, but the creature simply swatted the metal furniture aside and followed. The young Marine's final transmission was cut short by a sound that would haunt Ryu's nightmares for years to come. 2 sectors away, Kethvar the Zephyrian had heard the gunfire and was moving to assist. The 7-foot-tall alien warrior was a legend among his people, a fighter who had survived more battles than most soldiers ever saw. His natural armor gleamed under the emergency lights, and his ceremonial plasma blade hummed with deadly energy as he stalked through the corridors. Zephyrians were born warriors, their culture built around honor in combat and death before defeat. Kethvar had personally defeated a Krillian death squad, survived hand-to-hand combat with a Nexian berserker, and once held off 20 space pirates with nothing but his blade and his courage. He feared nothing that lived in the galaxy. The Warbeast emerged from the dining hall, dragging Commander Ryu's unconscious form behind it. When it saw Kethvar standing in the corridor, plasma blade ready, it actually paused. For a moment, predator and prey studied each other with professional interest. "You are a hunter," Kethvar said in perfect standard, his voice carrying the respect one warrior gives another. "I am Kethvar of the 3rd House. Let us see which of us is the better killer." The Zephyrian moved with liquid grace, his plasma blade carving brilliant arcs through the air as he attacked with techniques perfected over centuries of warfare. The superheated energy should have cut through anything, but the Warbeast simply watched the display with what might have been amusement. Then, almost casually, it backhanded the alien warrior through the nearest bulkhead. The reinforced metal crumpled like foil around Kethvar's broken body, and the legendary fighter didn't move again. His plasma blade clattered to the floor, its energy fading to nothing. In the command center, Dr. Kim Tae-ho worked frantically at his research terminal, while the sounds of battle echoed through the station's corridors. His fingers flew across the holographic interface as he searched through thousands of years of galactic history, looking for anything that might help them survive. "Captain, I'm reading about the fall of Zerion Prime," he reported, his voice tight with growing horror. "An entire planet, 12 billion inhabitants wiped out by a single warbeast in less than a week. The survivors said it didn't just kill randomly. It was systematic, intelligent, like it was following some kind of programming." On his screen, image after image of destroyed worlds flashed past. Ancient cities reduced to rubble, starships torn. Apart in space, entire star systems left empty and silent. In every case, the pattern was the same. A warbeast would appear and everything that lived would die. "The Andorian cluster massacre, 3,000 years ago," Dr. Kim continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "The warbeast there was, finally, stopped when the Andorians destroyed their own star, taking the creature with them. They considered it an acceptable sacrifice to save the rest of the galaxy." Captain Han felt his hands tremble as he gripped his command chair. "How many civilizations have they destroyed?" 12 confirmed, sir, but the records suggest there might have been others, entire species that were wiped out so completely that we don't even know they existed. 3 decks below, the Ethereal, called Mindweaver, had decided to try a different approach. The pale, telepathic alien had powers that most species could barely comprehend, able to read thoughts across star systems and influence minds with nothing but focused will. If weapons couldn't stop the creature, perhaps psychic intervention could. Mindweaver's large, opalescent eyes began to glow as it focused its mental energy, reaching out to touch the warbeast's consciousness. The alien had calmed raging beasts, before had soothed the minds of creatures driven mad by isolation and pain. The psychic contact lasted less than a second. Mindweaver's scream echoed through the station's corridors as blood poured from its eyes and nose. The alien collapsed, its mind shattered by contact with something that burned like molten hatred. "Its thoughts," Mindweaver gasped with its dying breath, "are not thoughts at all, just hunger, just rage. It was made to hate everything that lives." Security Chief Park Ji-hoon watched the creature's progress on his monitors from the safety of the command center. His fingers worked desperately. At the controls, sealing blast doors and emergency barriers throughout the station. Each one was rated to withstand direct hits from military-grade explosives. Each one lasted approximately 15 seconds against the Warbeast's claws. "Hull breach in Section F," reported Technician Choi Hye-jin, her voice cracking with disbelief. "Sir, it's not trying to escape. It's destroying structural supports, life support systems, power conduits. It's like it wants to tear the entire station apart." Park realized with growing horror that the creature wasn't just hunting randomly. It was following some kind of plan, systematically destroying everything that kept Kepler Station functional. First it eliminated the defenders, then it began dismantling their home piece by piece. "It's hurting us," he whispered into his comm. "Captain, I think it's driving the survivors towards specific areas, like it's saving us for something." The creature's roars continued to echo through the station, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of space itself. With each passing hour, the number of survivors grew smaller. Emergency teams that went out to rescue trapped civilians simply disappeared. Security squads sent to establish safe zones were found torn apart in corridors that looked like war zones. As night fell over Kepler Station's artificial day cycle, the remaining crew huddled in the command center and listened to the sounds of their home being systematically destroyed around them. They had tried everything their combined knowledge and technology could offer, and nothing had even slowed the creature down. In the growing darkness, lit only by emergency lighting and the sparks of failing systems, the Warbeast continued its ancient work. It had been created by a race that no longer existed, programmed with a single terrible purpose: to end all life wherever it was found. For thousands of years it had slept, but now it was awake again, and it remembered exactly what it had been made to do. The hunt was far from over. 8-year-old Nam Soo-jin had been playing in her family's quarters when the scary sounds started. The bright yellow dress her mother had bought her for her birthday was now wrinkled and dusty, and she clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hoppers, against her chest, like a shield against the frightening noises echoing through Kepler Station. When the evacuation alarms began screaming, her father, Chief Engineer Nam Byung-ho, had been working in the reactor room. Her mother, Dr. Nam Hae-young from the botanical lab, had been in a meeting with the alien researchers. In the confusion and chaos, as families ran through corridors filled with flashing red lights and panicked voices, little Soo-jin had gotten separated from the crowd. She remembered her mother's voice calling her name, growing fainter and fainter, as the crowd carried her parents away toward the evacuation pods. Soo-jin had tried to follow, but her small legs couldn't keep up with the rushing adults. When she finally stopped running, she found herself alone in a part of the station she didn't recognize. The maintenance shaft had seemed like a good hiding place. It was warm and quiet, and the thick walls muffled the terrible sounds that kept echoing through the station. Soo-jin had crawled as far back as she could, making a little nest with her dress and hugging Mr. Hoppers while she waited for her parents to find her. But parents never came. Instead, she heard other things. The sound of metal being torn apart like paper bags, roars that seemed to shake the entire station, and sometimes when the roaring stopped, she heard something even worse, silence that felt heavy and sad. Her daddy had always told her bedtime stories about the creatures that lived among the stars. Some were scary-looking but actually friendly, like the big blue Arctians who loved to tell jokes. Others were small and fuzzy and made funny chirping sounds when they were happy. "Remember, Soo-jin," her father would say, tucking her into bed, "just because something looks different or sounds scary doesn't mean it wants to hurt you. Sometimes the scariest-looking things just need a friend." The loose panel beneath her gave way without warning. One moment she was safely hidden in her little nest, and the next she was tumbling through empty air. The fall wasn't far, but it knocked the breath from her small lungs when she hit the corridor floor. Soo-jin sat up slowly, checking to make sure Mr. Hoppers was okay, then brushed the dust and dirt from her bright yellow dress. That's when she saw it, and her heart stopped beating for just a moment. The creature stood at the far end of Corridor 9, like something from her worst nightmares. It was huge, bigger than any living thing she had ever seen, with fur so black it seemed to swallow the red emergency lighting. Its massive shoulders were broader than her father was tall, and claws that looked like silver knives caught the light as it moved. but it was the eyes that held her attention. Burning amber orbs that seemed to glow in the darkness, filled with something that made Sujin's chest feel tight. Not anger exactly, but something deeper and sadder. Like the eyes of the stray dog her mother had found last winter, hurt and alone and scared of everything. The Warbeast had been hunting through the station for hours, following scent trails and the sound of frightened heartbeats. Every step it took was calculated. Every breath it drew was filtered for the smell of prey. It had killed the warriors who tried to fight it, destroyed the barriers that tried to contain it, and left a trail of devastation through the corridors. Of humanity's greatest achievement. Now it stood frozen, every instinct in its genetically engineered body screaming contradictory commands. This was prey. Small, weak, defenseless. The perfect target for its programmed hatred of all living things. It should attack immediately, without thought or hesitation. But something was wrong. The scent was all wrong. Sujin tilted her head to one side, studying the massive creature with the same curious expression she used when she found a new type of flower in her mother's botanical garden. It looked hurt, she realized. There were scorch marks on its fur from the weapons that had tried to stop it, and one of its great paws seemed to be favoring the ground slightly. "Oh, you poor thing," she said softly, her voice carrying clearly through the quiet corridor. "Are you lost too?" The words hit the Warbeast like a physical blow. In 3,000 years of existence, no living thing had ever spoken to it with kindness. Every voice it had heard had been filled with fear, anger, or dying screams. But this small creature's voice was gentle, concerned, like the sound of wind through peaceful forests that existed only in genetic memories, so old they might have been dreams. Sujin took a step forward, then another. She had learned not to be afraid of big animals from watching her mother work in the botanical lab. The station was home to creatures from dozens of different worlds, and many of them looked scary until you got to know them. The vegan tree crawlers looked like giant spiders, but were actually quite gentle. The Centauri cloud swimmers were bigger than ground cars, but only ate tiny floating plants. "You look sad," she continued, taking another small step forward. "Are you hurt? My mama is a doctor. She fixes things that are broken." The Warbeast's lips pulled back in an automatic snarl, revealing fangs the size of combat knives. Every fiber of its being was designed for killing, from its reinforced skeleton to its razor-sharp claws. But the little girl didn't run screaming like every other creature it had encountered. She didn't even look scared. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her yellow dress and pulled out a small wrapped treat. It was a nutrition bar designed for her pet hamster, Whiskers, who lived in a tiny habitat in her family's quarters. She had been saving it for when she found her way back home, but the big creature looked so hungry and sad. "Are you hungry?" Sujin asked, extending her tiny hand with the offering. "My mama always says that food makes everything better, even when you're scared or sad or lost." The Warbeast's nostrils flared as it caught the scent of the small treat, but underneath that simple smell was something far more complex, something that triggered responses buried so deep in its genetic code that it had forgotten they existed. This small being didn't smell like prey. It smelled like pack, like family, like the warmth of a safe den and the comfort of belonging somewhere, scents that spoke of protection and care and unconditional love. Concepts that had been burned out of its programming millennia ago, but somehow still existed in the deepest layers of its artificial instincts. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Warbeast hesitated. Its amber eyes, which had seen the destruction of worlds and the death of civilizations, focused on this tiny human child who offered it food and friendship instead of fear and hatred. Something ancient stirred in its engineered heart. Something that remembered a time before the warfare, before the hatred, before the endless killing. A time when its ancestors had been something other than weapons, when they had served a different purpose entirely. Sujin stood perfectly still, her small hand still extended in offering, her dark eyes full of the kind of trust that only children possess. She wasn't afraid, because her parents had taught her that the universe was full of friends she simply hadn't met yet. Every creature, no matter how different or frightening it might seem, had something good inside it if you just looked hard enough. The Corridor fell silent, except for the distant hum of the station's failing life support systems. Two beings stood facing each other in the emergency lighting, one designed to be the ultimate destroyer, the other too young to understand that some things in the galaxy couldn't be fixed with kindness. Neither of them moved. Both of them waited to see what would happen when an unstoppable force of destruction met an immovable force of innocence. The answer would change everything. The Warbeast stared at the small offering in Sujin's outstretched hand, its massive frame trembling with internal conflict. Every instinct programmed into its being screamed for blood and destruction, but something deeper, something buried beneath millennia of artificial rage, whispered a different command. The scent of this tiny human carried something it had forgotten, existed, the smell of innocence, of trust, of a creature that had never learned to hate. Slowly, like a mountain deciding to move, the Warbeast took one cautious step forward. The corridor seemed to shrink around its massive presence, emergency lighting casting long shadows that danced across its midnight black fur. Another step, then another, until it towered directly over the small girl who showed no fear. Its great head, large enough to swallow a grown man whole, lowered until those burning amber eyes were level with Sujin's dark ones. The creature's breath was hot against her face, carrying the scent of alien worlds and ancient battles, but the little girl only smiled wider. "You're not scary at all," she whispered, her voice as gentle as her mother's lullabies. "You're just a big puppy, aren't you? A really, really big puppy who's been alone for too long." The words struck something deep in the Warbeast's consciousness. Puppy, pack, companion. Terms that existed in genetic memories so old they predated its transformation into a weapon of war. Images flashed through its mind, not its own memories but those of its ancestors, running through green fields under alien suns, playing with young ones who laughed instead of screamed, being scratched behind the ears by gentle hands that offered love instead of pain. Sujin reached out slowly, her tiny hand moving toward the creature's massive snout. The Warbeast could have snapped her arm off without effort, could have ended her life with less thought than swatting an insect. Instead, it held perfectly still as warm fingers touched its nose. The contact sent shockwaves through the creature's entire being. No one had touched it with kindness in 3,000 years. Every hand that had reached toward it had carried weapons or restraints or fear. But this small human's touch was soft, curious, caring. It was the touch of someone who wanted to comfort, not control. "There we go," Sujin said softly, her fingers exploring the creature's massive face with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "You're just lonely, aren't you? Nobody should have to be alone in the scary dark." Her small hand found a spot behind the creature's left ear, a place where the fur was softer and the skin more sensitive. When she began to scratch gently, the Warbeast's entire body shuddered. The sensation was completely alien to its experience, sending signals to parts of its brain that had been dormant for millennia. "My daddy says all animals like ear scratches," Sujin continued, her voice taking on the conversational tone she used when talking to her pet hamster. "He showed me how to pet the station cats without scaring them. You have to be gentle and patient, and let them know you're friendly." A sound began to build deep in the Warbeast's chest. For a moment, the creature itself didn't understand what was happening. The sound wasn't the roar of rage that had terrified entire star systems, or the growl of a predator stalking its prey. It was something else entirely, a low, rumbling vibration that seemed to come from the very center of its being. It was purring. The little girl's eyes lit up with delight. "You do like it. Oh, you're such a good boy. But you know what good boys do? They listen when someone talks to them. They sit nicely and wait for treats and pets." The Warbeast's head tilted to one side, a gesture so incongruously dog-like that it would have been comical if anyone else had been there to see it. Its amber eyes, which had burned with nothing but hatred for centuries, now held something entirely different. Confusion, yes, but also a desperate hunger for more of this strange new sensation called affection. Sujin stepped back slightly and looked directly into those massive eyes. Her voice took on the firm but loving tone her mother used when training the family's pet turtle, a tone that expected obedience not through fear but through trust. "Sit," she said clearly. The word hit the warbeast like a bolt of lightning, not because of the command itself, but because of how it was delivered. There was no fear in the little girl's voice, no attempt to dominate or control. It was the voice of a pack leader giving guidance to a valued pack member, the kind of leadership that came from love rather than power. Every gene in the creature's body responded instantly. The artificial programming that had turned it into a weapon of mass destruction was suddenly overwhelmed by something far older and more fundamental. The warbeast's hindquarters touched the corridor floor with surprising grace for something so massive, its tail, scarred from 1,000 battles, beginning to move in a rhythm it hadn't felt for 3 millennia. It was wagging. "Good boy," Sojin exclaimed, clapping her small hands together in pure joy. "Such a good boy, oh, you're the best boy in the whole galaxy." The praise hit the warbeast harder than any weapon ever had. Its massive head tilted again, and for the first time in its long existence, its expression could only be described as hopeful. The burning rage that had defined its entire purpose began to cool, replaced by something it had no words for, but desperately wanted more of. Approval. Acceptance. Love. The little girl stepped forward again and wrapped her small arms around the creature's massive neck, hugging it the way she hugged her stuffed rabbit. "And you were just scared and lonely, weren't you? Nobody understood that you needed friends, not fighting." The warbeast remained perfectly still, afraid that any movement might end this miraculous moment. The small human's warmth seeped through. Its fur and her heartbeat, steady and unafraid, seemed to synchronize with its own. For the first time in 3,000 years, the creature felt something other than the compulsion to destroy. It felt peaceful. Time passed in the quiet corridor. The emergency lights continued to flash, and somewhere in the distance the sounds of station repair crews could be heard. But in their small bubble of calm, predator and innocent simply existed together, each finding something they had desperately needed. An hour later, Security Chief Park Ji-hoon carefully rounded the corner into Corridor 9, following scanner readings that made no sense. His pulse rifle was ready, and behind him, a full tactical team waited for his signal. They had been tracking the warbeast's path of destruction, when suddenly, impossibly, it had simply stopped. What he found defied every expectation. Little Sujin was curled up against the creature's massive flank, fast asleep with her yellow dress spread around her like flower petals. Her stuffed rabbit lay nearby, and one small hand rested on the warbeast's front paw. The creature itself lay in a protective curve around the sleeping child, its great head resting where it could watch the approaches to their resting place. When it saw Park and his team, its amber eyes tracked their movement with alert intelligence, but there was no aggression in its gaze, only watchfulness, the way a guard dog might observe strangers near its beloved family. "Oh my God," Park whispered into his comm, his voice barely audible. "Captain, you need to see this. The warbeast is protecting her." The creature's tail gave a single cautious wag at the sound of his voice, as if asking whether these new humans might also be the kind who gave ear scratches and called it a good boy. In the silence of the corridor, a new chapter in galactic history had quietly begun. Dr. Kim Tae-ho stared at his scanner readings for the 3rd time, unable to believe what the instruments were telling him. The massive creature that had terrorized Kepler Station for hours now showed biological signs he had never seen before. Its stress hormones, which should have been off the charts for a predator in hunting mode, had dropped to levels consistent, with a house pet relaxing in the sun. "Captain, look at this," he whispered, showing the display to Han Woo-jin. "Its brain patterns have completely changed. The areas associated with aggression and hunting behavior have gone almost dormant, while the sections linked to social bonding and contentment are lighting up like a festival." Captain Han knelt carefully beside the sleeping child and her enormous guardian, moving slowly to avoid startling either of them. The warbeast's amber eyes tracked his approach, but instead of the murderous rage that had consumed them hours before, Han saw something that looked almost like curiosity. The creature's massive tail even gave a tentative wag when Sujin stirred, in her sleep. "How is this possible?" Han asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "This thing destroyed half our security force. It tore through reinforced bulkheads like paper, and now it's acting like a dog." finished Dr. Kim, shaking his head in amazement. A very large, very powerful dog that's found its favorite human. From his medical bed nearby, the Arctian survivor Veltar struggled to sit up, his large black eyes wide with recognition. "Humans," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "The legends spoke of the first pack, but I thought they were just stories told to children." Dr. Kim spun around, his scientific curiosity overriding everything else. "What legends? Tell me everything you know." Veltar's blue skin seemed to pale as he recalled ancient stories. "My grandfather was a scholar of pre-civilization history. He told me about creatures called the Fenrathi, who lived before the Great Wars began. They weren't weapons then. They were companions, guardians, partners to a species that could bond with any living thing. The stories said these beings could tame the untamable, make family from enemies, turn the wildest beasts into loyal friends." "The humans," Dr. Kim breathed, pieces of the puzzle clicking together in his mind. His fingers flew over his research terminal, diving deep into genetic archives that hadn't been accessed in centuries. "Captain, I'm finding references to the original Fenrathi genome. You're right, Veltar, they weren't weapons at all. The holographic display filled with images of creatures that looked remarkably like the Warbeast, but their posture was different. Where the current creature carried itself like a predator, these ancient images showed beings that walked with the confident ease of beloved pets. Their eyes held intelligence and warmth instead of rage and hunger. They were pack animals," Dr. Kim continued, his excitement growing with each discovery. "Highly intelligent, deeply social creatures that formed unbreakable bonds with their families. But look at this. Genetic modification markers throughout their DNA. Someone changed them, Captain. Someone took these loyal companions and turned them into killing machines." Little Su Jin stirred awake as the adults talked, her small hand automatically reaching out to pat the massive head resting near her. The Warbeast, no, Dr. Kim realized it wasn't really a Warbeast anymore, responded with a gentle rumble of contentment. "Did I do good, Captain Han?" she asked with a yawn, her voice carrying the sleepy innocence that only children possess. "I helped the puppy feel better. He was so sad and lonely." The creature's tail thumped against the floor at the sound of her voice, and it nuzzled its enormous head against her tiny hand. The gesture was so tender, so completely at odds with its fearsome appearance that Han felt tears forming in his eyes. "You did very good, Su Jin," he said softly, reaching out to gently touch the child's shoulder. "Better than any of us could have imagined." Within hours, news of the miracle on Kepler Station was transmitted across the galaxy. The footage of little Su Jin sleeping peacefully against the massive creature sent shockwaves through every civilized world. Species that had lived in terror of Warbeast encounters for millennia suddenly saw humanity in a completely different light. The Galactic Council, which had previously viewed humans as newcomers to be politely tolerated, now requested emergency sessions to discuss what this discovery might mean. If humans could pacify the most feared predators in known space with nothing but kindness and patience, what other seemingly impossible problems might they solve? Dr. Kim worked around the clock to establish the first Warbeast Rehabilitation Center on Kepler Station. Within weeks, other lost Warbeasts were being brought in, creatures found drifting in damaged ships, discovered on dead worlds where they had apparently been left behind, or captured after attacks that had ended in mysterious retreats. Each encounter followed the same pattern. When approached by humans with patience and understanding instead of fear and weapons, the creatures remembered something buried deep in their altered genetics. The artificial programming that had made them into weapons began to break down, replaced by instincts that were far older and more fundamental. Su Jin became the first official Warbeast companion, though she insisted on calling her new friend Buddy, because he's the goodest boy in the whole galaxy. Her natural gift with the creatures inspired human children across the stars to volunteer for the rehabilitation program. Soon Kepler Station echoed, with the laughter of young voices and the contented rumbles of creatures rediscovering what it meant to be loved. The creature that had once been known only as a weapon of mass destruction now spent its days following Su Jin through the station's corridors. It attended her classes, where it learned to sit quietly while she studied. It waited patiently outside the cafeteria while she ate lunch with her friends. At night, it curled up beside her bed, amber eyes watching over her dreams with protective Devotion. Other stations began requesting their own rehabilitation centers. Human families volunteered to become Warbeast companions, and soon the creatures that had once toppled entire civilizations were serving as guardians and protectors of the communities they had once terrorized. The transformation wasn't always easy. Some Warbeasts had been weapons for so long that the process took months of patient work. But human dedication and the creatures' buried instincts for pack bonding proved stronger than centuries of artificial programming. Captain Han often found himself watching Sujin and Buddy playing in the station's recreational areas, still amazed by the sight. The massive creature would carefully carry toys in jaws that had once torn through starship hulls, and its tail never stopped wagging when the little girl was near. "You know what the most incredible part is?" Dr. Kim said one day, as they observed the pair. "The genetic analysis shows that Buddy is actually smarter now than when he was a weapon. The bonding process seems to have unlocked cognitive abilities that were suppressed by the military programming. As word spread throughout the galaxy, the reputation of both humans and the rehabilitated Fenrati grew. Planets that had once lived in fear now welcomed the partnerships between human families and their massive companions. The creatures' incredible strength and loyalty, combined with human wisdom and compassion, created bonds that benefited entire communities. The rehabilitation centers became symbols of hope across the stars. Beings from dozens of species came to witness the miracle of creatures designed for destruction, learning to love instead of hate. Children from worlds that had never known peace finally slept soundly, knowing that the monsters of their nightmares had become protectors of their dreams. And it all began because one little girl had seen past the monster to the lonely animal beneath and spoken the simple word that changed everything. Sit. The pack bond that had been broken millennia ago was finally restored, creating a future where the greatest weapons of destruction had become the most devoted guardians of life. The end.